I gave my parents a quilt I sewed from Grandma's dresses. But they looked disgusted. "This is so tacky," my aunt laughed. "Why can't you be normal like your sister?" My mother said, "She got us a cruise." "And you brought this?" I folded the quilt and said quietly, "Grandma left something inside one of the pockets. For you." I sat in my small apartment in North Carolina, staring at the quilt spread out across my bed. Each piece of fabric represented something meaningful to me: my grandmother's old dresses. The ones she had worn when I was a kid. The ones I could still smell faintly of lavender and old-timey perfume if I closed my eyes and remembered. I'd spent weeks on this quilt, stitching together memories, thinking it would be the perfect gift for my parents. It was personal. Thoughtful. Real. But, as I looked at it now, the weight of what I had done felt heavy. It wasn't like I hadn't tried to get them something they'd appreciate before. My parents, Grace and Daniel, were the type of people who would rather receive an expensive, material gift than something from the heart. It had always been that way. Every Christmas, every birthday, they'd boast about their luxurious vacations or the expensive gadgets they'd received from their friends. My sister, Sarah, was the one who always got it right. She gave them what they wanted: something flashy, something status-affirming. A cruise. A spa retreat. They'd always compare me to her, as if I could somehow replicate her picture-perfect life. But that was never me. I was always the quieter one. The one who didn't fit in with their expectations. Sarah had their world figured out. I didn't. When Grandma passed away a few months ago, I inherited her things, her dresses, her old sewing machine, and her life stories woven into the fabric of everything she had owned. I couldn't bring myself to part with them. So, instead, I did what I knew best: I sewed. I thought the quilt would be the perfect gift. A piece of Grandma, something that wasn't just a shiny object or a luxury item, but something deeply meaningful. I figured my parents might finally see me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. But as I stood in front of my mirror, still holding the quilt, I felt unsure. Would they even appreciate it? Would they just scoff at it, like they always did with anything that didn't fit their idea of perfection? I had told them I'd be bringing a gift to dinner. I'd imagined their faces lighting up when they saw what I had created, how they'd finally realize that it was never about money or appearances for me. It was about family. About love. When I arrived at my parents' house, everything was exactly as I remembered: pristine, cold, and overly perfect. The scent of fresh-cut flowers filled the air, and the lights overhead cast a warm glow on everything in sight. But there was something unsettling about the place. Something stiff and uncomfortable. I hated it. It always felt like a performance, like I was walking on a stage where every word, every action was being scrutinized for its level of success or failure. "Hi, Mom," I said as I stepped inside. My voice was quieter than usual, unsure. "Dinner's almost ready," she said, barely glancing up from the counter where she was placing a roasted chicken on a plate. Her voice didn't hold warmth, but it was still polite, as if the words were rehearsed. I looked over at my father, who sat in his usual chair in the living room. His eyes were glued to the TV, absorbed in whatever sports game was on. "I'll be right back," I muttered, making my way toward the kitchen table. I set the quilt down carefully, the fabric rustling softly. It had taken me weeks to sew it, and I had wanted this moment to be perfect. But it felt like a heavy burden now, as if it would be too much for them to handle. My mom noticed the quilt as she walked past me. She stopped, her eyes narrowing as if she was trying to understand what she was looking at. "What is this?" she asked, her tone colder than I had expected. "It's a gift," I said softly, trying to hide my nerves. "From me to you and Dad." She took a step back, looking at it like it was something she had never seen before. She didn't seem to know how to react. It was almost like the quilt didn't fit into the neat little box of expectations she had for her children. "Why would you bring us something like this?" she asked, her voice hardening. "It's just old. Tacky." I felt a lump rise in my throat. This wasn't the reaction I had imagined. I had hoped she'd see the effort, the love, and the thoughtfulness behind it. But instead, she dismissed it as if it were nothing more than a cheap, sentimental relic. I thought you'd like it. It's made from Grandma's dresses, I said quietly, my hands trembling as I folded the edges of the quilt. I didn't want to fight. I never did. But it hurt. It hurt that they couldn't even appreciate it for what it was, a piece of family history. What do you mean, Grandma's dresses? My mom's eyebrows shot up in confusion. They're the ones she used to wear when I was little. The ones I remember from when we lived together. They're special. She let out a frustrated sigh. Well, I'm sure it's special, but we were hoping for something better. More practical. Something more modern. You know, like what Sarah got us. I flinched at the mention of Sarah. My sister. Always the perfect one. Always the one who got it right. Sarah had just given them a week-long cruise. Something they could show off. Something that would look good on social media. A trip to the Bahamas. A getaway to brag about. She was the golden child. The one who always made the right decisions in their eyes. I looked down at the quilt, trying not to let the sting of their disappointment wash over me. I couldn't compete with that. I never had. Just as I was about to say something else, my Aunt Ellen entered the room. She was always the most critical one in the family, the one who couldn't stop comparing me to Sarah. What's this? She asked, her eyes flicking from the quilt to me with a judgmental glance. I swallowed hard. It's a gift for Mom and Dad. Aunt Ellen laughed, a sharp, condescending sound that echoed through the room. Oh, sweetie. Really? A quilt? This is so tacky. Why can't you be normal like Sarah? She knows what we like. Her words hit me like a punch. Why couldn't I just be like Sarah? Why couldn't I fit into the box they had created for their children? It was like nothing I ever did was good enough. It never had been. Thank you, Aunt Ellen, I muttered, my voice tight. It's from the heart. I wanted to walk away, but I didn't. I couldn't. The quilt was still lying on the table, folded neatly but crumpled in my chest, the weight of their judgment crushing down on me. It wasn't what they wanted. It wasn't the gift they expected. It wasn't the picture-perfect, luxurious thing they could flaunt in front of others. I slowly stood up, folding the quilt with deliberate care, my hands shaking as I did so. I knew what I had to say next. Grandma left something inside one of the pockets, I said, my voice barely a whisper. For you. The room went silent. My mother's face changed. Her eyes softened, confusion creeping into her expression. She glanced at the quilt, then back at me, as if searching for something. What are you talking about? I hesitated, then reached into the pocket of the quilt, pulling out a small, folded piece of paper. I handed it to her. Her hands were trembling as she unfolded it. The paper was old, yellowed with age. I could smell the faint scent of lavender, the same scent that clung to Grandma's old clothes. My mother read the words aloud, My dear Grace, Daniel, and Ellen, I know our family has its struggles, but please remember that love is always stitched into the fabric of who we are. I leave this token with you, as a reminder of what truly matters. Margaret. For the first time that evening, my mother's face softened. She blinked rapidly, as if trying to process what she was reading. What's this? She asked quietly, her voice almost breaking. I swallowed, my throat tight. It's from Grandma. She must have left it in there for you. My father, who had been silent throughout the whole exchange, finally looked up from his chair. His eyes were no longer focused on the TV. He looked at the quilt, then at the note in my mother's hands. It wasn't the cruise. It wasn't the material thing they expected. But for the first time in a long time, it felt like maybe, just maybe, they were beginning to understand. My mother folded the letter carefully, her fingers lingering on the edges as if the words themselves were too fragile to touch. She stared at the paper for a long time, her face unreadable. The room was silent except for the soft tick of the clock on the wall, as if everything had stopped moving, held in place by the weight of the moment. I waited, watching her, waiting for some sign of recognition, something that would tell me she understood, that she saw beyond the quilt and the old fabric and the story I had tried to weave with my hands. But all she said was, "Why would she leave this in the quilt?" I felt my heart clench, not from anger, but from the overwhelming exhaustion of trying to explain myself to them, again. Grandma's letter had been a simple thing. A final wish, a reminder of the things that had always mattered to her, and perhaps to me as well. It was clear to me, but I wasn't sure if it was clear to my parents. "She wanted you to remember," I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. "She always said that real love isn't about the things you show off or how much money you spend. It's about what you keep close, what's real. She wanted you to remember that." My mother didn't reply right away. Instead, she looked down at the quilt again. Her fingers brushed over the fabric, tracing the stitches. It felt like she was trying to find the hidden meaning, like if she searched hard enough, she would find some kind of redemption in the frayed edges of the fabric. I wasn't sure she'd ever truly understand. The tension in the room lingered like smoke, heavy and thick. Aunt Ellen, who had been watching the exchange with a skeptical gaze, shifted uncomfortably, breaking the silence. "Well, I think we've all had enough of the sentimental stuff," she said, her voice snapping the fragile stillness in half. "Don't get me wrong, I'm sure it means something to you, Morgan, but really," she shook her head, her lips pursed. "It's just not what we need. Not what any of us need." I wanted to scream at her. I wanted to tell her that she had no idea what it felt like to pour your heart into something, to give a piece of yourself in a way that didn't fit into her neat little box of what was acceptable. But I didn't. I knew it wouldn't change anything. Instead, I folded the quilt again, this time with more care, more intention. I took my time, carefully making sure each piece was perfectly aligned. It was almost meditative, the act of folding it, a way for me to calm my thoughts, to steady myself. My father, who had been sitting silently the entire time, finally spoke. His voice was low, almost apologetic. "You're right," he said, looking at me with a mixture of uncertainty and something else, something I couldn't quite place. "It's not about the cruise. It's about something else, isn't it?" I looked at him, surprised. He had never spoken like this before. My father, for all his faults, had always been the one to dismiss things he didn't understand. The one who would quietly support whatever my mother said, always going along with the flow, never questioning it. But now, his words hung in the air between us, heavy with the weight of something he had never said to me before. "It's about love," I said softly, nodding. "It's about remembering the people who came before us, and the way they lived their lives. It's about remembering who we are, not just who we pretend to be." My mother sighed, rubbing her temple. She looked worn out, as if this conversation had drained her. Maybe it had. Maybe she had never really considered the possibility that love could be expressed in a way that wasn't about grand gestures or outward appearances. "I don't know if I can understand this," she said, her voice low, almost regretful. "I don't know if I've ever understood it. I just wanted something that made sense. Something that looked good." I could feel my chest tightening again. I wanted to explain. I wanted to make her see, to help her understand. But I knew the truth. I couldn't force her to change, and I couldn't change what I had given her. It was just a quilt. A simple, imperfect thing. I sat down at the table, running my fingers over the worn fabric, letting the silence stretch between us. Aunt Ellen stood awkwardly in the corner, her gaze flicking between my parents and me, unsure of how to proceed. Then, unexpectedly, my father stood up. His chair scraped loudly against the floor as he moved across the room. "I'll go check on dinner," he said, his voice cutting through the tension. "It'll be ready soon." He didn't look back at me, but his tone had softened, just enough that I could hear the unspoken apology in it. My mother, still holding the quilt, looked at me once more, her expression unreadable. I I don't know if I can ever appreciate this the way you want me to, she said, her voice a whisper. But I'll try. I nodded, not sure what else to say. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't everything I wanted it to be. But for now, it would have to be enough. Dinner came and went in a blur of polite conversation and forced smiles. My father talked about his work, as usual, his voice sounding distant and distracted. Aunt Ellen kept glancing at her watch, clearly eager to leave. My mother didn't mention the quilt again, but every now and then, I caught her looking at it out of the corner of her eye, as though she were still unsure of what to make of it. As the evening drew to a close, I packed up my things, gathering my purse and coat. The house felt cold again, the warmth of the meal fading with the setting sun. Thanks for dinner, I said, standing up to leave. I'll see you later. My mother didn't reply, but she stood up and walked over to where I was. For a moment, I thought she might say something else, something that would help me make sense of all of this. But instead, she just placed her hand on my arm, briefly, before pulling away. Take care, Morgan, she said softly. And with that, I left. The door clicked shut behind me, and I stepped out into the quiet night. The stars above me seemed too far away, too distant. Everything felt heavy, as though I were carrying a weight I couldn't quite set down. But even as I walked away, I couldn't help but feel a small flicker of hope. Maybe they didn't understand now, but maybe, just maybe, they would one day. I didn't need them to change overnight. I just needed them to see me, to see the love I had put into the quilt, and maybe, just maybe, they would find some way to appreciate it. To appreciate me. The next few days felt like a blur. After dinner at my parents' house, I didn't hear from them for a while. I tried not to dwell on it, not to imagine what they were saying about me behind closed doors. But the quiet gnawed at me. I wondered if my mother had shown the quilt to her friends or if Aunt Ellen had made another cutting remark about it behind my back. But then, 2 days later, I received a text message from my mom. It was a photo of the quilt, folded neatly on the couch. And underneath it, in her usual, precise handwriting, she wrote, I've been thinking about it. I still don't fully understand, but maybe you're right. This is more than a quilt. It's a part of our family. Thank you, Morgan. My heart skipped a beat. It wasn't much, but it was something. I put my phone down, a tear slipping down my cheek. Maybe, after all, this was enough. I stared at the message from my mom, the words lingering on the screen. I've been thinking about it. I still don't fully understand, but maybe you're right. This is more than a quilt. It's a part of our family. Thank you, Morgan. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the glowing, dramatic realization I had dreamed of in my head. But it was a start. A small acknowledgement that, maybe, just maybe, they were beginning to see things from my perspective. But despite that, something inside me stirred, a restless feeling I couldn't shake. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, there was something more I could do to make them truly understand. The thing about my parents, especially my mother, was that they were stuck in their ways. They were obsessed with appearances, with impressing others, and with the idea of success defined by wealth and status. I had spent my entire life trying to live up to their expectations, trying to please them with things they would care about, only to be disappointed every time. The quilt wasn't good enough. The cruise would have been, but I had refused to follow that path. Maybe it was time for them to feel what it was like to be dismissed. To be given something that didn't fit neatly into their precious box of acceptable gifts. A gift they couldn't show off or talk about with their friends. Something that would haunt them, something that would make them think twice the next time they tried to belittle my choices. I didn't have the strength to confront them directly. But there was one thing I knew I could do. I could use their obsession with appearances against them, in a way they'd never expect. A week later, I called my Aunt Ellen. Hey, Aunt Ellen, how's everything going? I said, keeping my tone casual. Oh, she replied, sounding a bit too cheerful. Same old, same old. Nothing too exciting around here. Why? Well, I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. I was thinking about something, and I'd like to get your opinion on it. Go ahead, darling. You know I'm always here for advice, she said, almost too eagerly. Okay, well, I've been thinking about what Grandma left behind, and I realized there's something I didn't tell anyone. I paused, letting the words settle into the conversation. The quilt, it's not the only thing she left in those pockets. Aunt Ellen's voice immediately changed, sharp and curious. What do you mean? Well, when I was going through Grandma's things, I found something else tucked in there. Something I didn't know about until I started sewing the quilt. Something that's pretty valuable, I said, trying to sound nonchalant. Aunt Ellen's interest piqued. Valuable? What do you mean, Morgan? Something that could be useful. You know, to help with some bills or maybe to get something nicer than the cruise. I thought you might want to know, since you seem so invested in the material stuff, I said with a hint of sarcasm that I knew would get her attention. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could practically hear her mind racing. Tell me what it is, she said, her voice tight with greed. I'm listening. Well, I'm not sure what exactly it is, I continued, carefully shaping my story. But I think it might be something Grandma kept hidden for a reason. I wasn't sure if I should say anything, but I guess it might be important after all. It's tucked away in the very last corner of the quilt. You should come see it. If you want. Aunt Ellen's voice was practically vibrating with excitement now. I'll be there tomorrow. Don't touch it, Morgan. Just keep it safe. I smiled to myself, barely able to hold in my amusement. I knew she'd be over the moon about this, desperate to get her hands on whatever valuable thing I had just implied existed. The next day, as planned, Aunt Ellen showed up. She was practically giddy as she walked through the door, her eyes darting around the room, looking for any sign of this hidden treasure. You didn't touch it, did you? She asked, a hint of urgency in her voice. Nope, not at all, I said, motioning to the quilt laid out on the table. I've kept it safe for you. She rushed over, her hands trembling as she pulled the quilt from the table and began searching through the pockets with an almost manic energy. I stood off to the side, watching with quiet satisfaction as she fumbled through the fabric, her face a mask of greed. Well? I asked, pretending to be innocently curious. She paused, her fingers touching something inside one of the pockets. What is this? She muttered to herself, pulling out a small, folded piece of paper. She unfolded it eagerly, and her eyes scanned the words. My grandmother's handwriting. My heart pounded in my chest as I prepared for the final act of my small, subtle revenge. What's this? Aunt Ellen demanded, her voice shaking. This doesn't make any sense. I leaned in, keeping my expression neutral, but inside, I was fighting the urge to laugh. Oh, I'm sure it's important. Grandma always said she hid things for a reason. Did you find what you were looking for? Aunt Ellen's face went pale as she read the words aloud, and I could hear the tremor in her voice. My dear Ellen, I know you've always valued the material things in life. But remember, love, family, and memories are worth more than anything money can buy. I'm leaving you this reminder. Please, don't let what truly matters slip away. Her face twisted with confusion and frustration. This isn't what I wanted, she spat, crumpling the paper in her hands. What the heck is this supposed to mean? I stood there, my expression unchanged, as I watched her fume. I guess Grandma wanted you to have something that would really make you think, I said, my voice calm and steady. But I'm sure you'll find a way to put it all together. After all, you always seem to know exactly what people need, don't you? Aunt Ellen threw the crumpled paper on the floor, storming out of the room with a furious look on her face. I didn't need to see her to know that she was livid. She wasn't getting what she had hoped for, and it was deliciously satisfying to watch. A few days later, my parents called. I was expecting more of the same, indifference or guilt, but I wasn't prepared for what came next. We need to talk, my mother said when I picked up the phone. I braced myself for another lecture, but instead, her voice was softer than usual. Morgan, your aunt came to us after you spoke with her. She wasn't happy. She came over here, yelling about the quilt and the letter you gave her. I felt a small, satisfied grin tug at my lips. I'd done it. I had forced them to reckon with something they would never have otherwise acknowledged, their obsession with appearances, their blind focus on material success. You were right, my mother continued, her tone now reflecting something closer to regret. We've spent too much time chasing things that don't matter. I don't know how I missed that before. I paused, waiting for her to finish. I don't know if I can ever fully change, she said. But I promise, I'll try harder to understand you. I'll try to appreciate the things that matter, even if they're not what I thought they should be. And for the first time in my life, I felt a flicker of hope. Not because they had completely transformed, but because they were finally seeing me, truly seeing me, for who I was. The quilt wasn't just fabric anymore. It wasn't a joke or a disappointment. It had become the catalyst for something bigger, something more meaningful. And I realized, in that moment, that I didn't need their approval to be proud of what I had created. I didn't need them to tell me I was good enough.